Here to speak with LBC presenter Matthew Wright following the release of his book Creativity is British comedy legend John Cleese.
Welcome. Hope you're enjoying your Radio Centre tuning in event so far. Having a creative time of it all, because creativity is what we're going to be talking about with Mr. John Cleese, ladies and gentlemen. John Cleese.
Thank you.
Time is worryingly short. You probably know most of the story, the highlights, footlights. That was the week.
Oh, cut that crap.
Python, blah, blah, blah. I was going to say, you're supposed to be back at Cambridge this week, but that's not happening anymore, is it?
No, that's a bit of fun. I saw that an art history professor had been blacklisted for doing a brief impersonation of Adolf Hitler at the Union. And I did one on Python, so I blacklisted myself before somebody else did, you know? Offered to go back when there wasn't a woke agenda.
Is that woke agenda or cancel culture? Or are they the same thing?
It's the same thing. There's extraordinary sensitivity, the idea that you shouldn't hear anything that you disagree with.
Where does it, you've written this book about creativity.
Yeah.
A short and cheerful guide, and it is that. Where does creativity, how does creativity square with a woke agenda?
Oh, it's destructive of any sort of creativity, because creativity, I mean, I have to give you a very sort of concentrated version because the time is so short. But creativity, I believe, real creativity comes from the unconscious, promptings from the unconscious. You can make tiny improvements using the logical part of your mind. But if you're going to come up with anything that's really new, it's going to come up from the unconscious, and that can only happen if you're in a state of play. It's very hard to be in a state of play when you're an adult. Kids play effortlessly because the parents are minding the shop. You see what I mean? When you're adult, you have so many responsibilities and things on your mind that the only way that you can get in a playful mood, which is when the unconscious can start sending you stuff, the only time you can actually do that is by sealing yourself off, creating boundaries of time and boundaries of space. In other words, making sure that you're not interrupted, because interruptions are absolutely lethal to creativity. And then you've got to put aside a certain amount of time so that you know you're cut off from the world. You cannot play in ordinary life. You can only play if you create this space. So that's the ideas in the book compressed into about 90 seconds.
That's a pretty good summation, I have to say. Hair and tortoise brains,
yes.
Little minds that...
That was a great book by Guy Claxton that I read that helped to formulate my ideas a lot. But the most important thing was a bit of research done by a guy called McKinnon in Berkeley in the 70s. And he studied architecture. He was interested not in creative artists, but in businessmen and journalists and engineers, but particularly in architects. And he simply found out from all the architects he talked to who are the ones you consider the most creative. And then he went to them and said, tell me what you do from the moment you wake up in the morning to the moment you go to bed that night. And then he went to the non-creative ones, so he didn't tell them that was why he was talking to them. And he asked them the same question. And two things came up. The creative people knew how to play, and the word that McKinnon used, was childlike, because when children play, they're completely absorbed in what they're doing. They're not thinking, I must get this done so that I can move on to the next thing. They're actually deeply interested in something and they play with it. The other interesting thing about creative people is that they delay decisions as long as they can.
And people are going to think that much. Well, what about deadlines? How can I delay a decision?
Well, that's why I said as long as they can.
So they know there's a deadline.
Yes, the first thing, I made all those films years ago for Video Arts on management, and the most useful thing I learned out of the 30 or 40 that I wrote was when you have a decision to make, the most important question to ask straight away is, when does it have to be made? And that's a fact. That's real world stuff. It's got to be made this afternoon or in 3 months. But why make it before then? And because you might get new ideas or you may get new information. So why would you make a decision before you have to make it? It's extraordinary. And the answer is anxiety. Because most people don't like leaving things unresolved. And the characteristic of the architects, the creative architects and all creative people, is that they can live with a state of uncertainty of things not being resolved much better than most people can. Most people want to get the thing resolved just to get it resolved. So they take the decision much earlier than they need to take it. Now, if you have the time to take it, then you can sit and create a space and just think about the problem in a playful way, not knowing which way you're going to go. So there's no such thing when you're being creative as a mistake, because you have to follow it before you discover whether it's useful or not. So you've got to be prepared to go just wherever your mind takes you and just constantly bring yourself back, a little bit like in meditation where your mind goes off and you come back to the breath, right? People are aware of that idea. Well, it's the same. You just, your mind wanders off and you're suddenly thinking about Christmas lunch and you come back to what was the problem that I was trying to solve.
Is this applicable to commercial radio? I mean,
it's applicable to anything. It's applicable to any activity where you're trying to do something better. And people think that creativity is to do with the arts. No, it's creativity is anybody who is innovative in any way. A flower arranger might become better. Do you see what I mean? If she knew, if it knew. That's why there's no spontaneity once you're in a woke atmosphere, because people are always checking what they say, and the only real creativity comes from spontaneity. So once you have a situation where people are checking in advance what they're going to say in case it's going to offend someone, creativity just goes away.
So how do we then reconcile those two things, the desire to be creative, in a world where increasingly there is a pressure to be respectful of people's feelings?
Well, I'm all in favor of being respectful of people's feelings, but people have different levels of sensitivity.
They do.
And we used to rather admire people who controlled their feelings and were able to remain tolerant of other people without getting upset about them. You know, I wrote a couple of books on psychiatry with a fellow called Robin Skinner, and Robin said something which I think is very profound. He said, if you can't control your own emotions, then you have to start controlling other people's behavior. So the thing about people who can control their own emotions is they're not making demands on how other people behave. Do you see what I mean? Whereas in the world of woke, it's all about taking the most sensitive. I mean, the idea of microaggressions, tiny little aggressions like mispronouncing someone's name. Well, ever since I've been going to America in 1964, everyone has called me Cleese. I don't know why, because you don't go to the supermarket to buy cheddar cheese. Cleese. But this has been going on since 1964, and I haven't had to go into a nursing home yet. Do you see what I mean? So this sort of oversensitivity, it's insane. And cognitive behavioral psychologists, who are a pretty sort of sensible, evidence-based way of helping people, particularly young people with their anxiety and depression, they say that what they tell people when they're helping them with their problems is the opposite of what woke people are advocating. So woke way of doing things will actually make these problems of anxiety and depression worse.
You say in the book that creativity is very much dependent on the state of mind. You've alluded as much as that we need to clear the mind to allow the creative process to go on. So therefore, if one is stressed or anxious, it would follow that that would interrupt the creative process.
Yes, that's right. That's why you've got to be, anxiety. If people become anxious, they stop being creative and they go to the stereotype. They go to stereotypical thinking the moment that they get anxious. That's why it's difficult to create the atmosphere, particularly if you're in a creative group, because the person in charge of the group has really got to know what they're doing, and to create a feeling of trust between people in the group so that they can say the first thing that comes into their head.
I think that's quite difficult, actually.
Yes.
I said it's a deceptively simple book. I think that is quite. It'll be very interesting to hear from people's questions later how you can create that kind of atmosphere. Because I'm sitting thinking, in just my experience of working in professional media environments, you are anxious about making mistakes. The very thing that you're saying that you should be allowed to make mistakes.
Of course.
But that's not necessarily how the modern media world is.
No, but that's because the people in charge are anxious.
Yes.
That's the only reason. I'll tell you something interesting.
Is it because they're all essentially lawyers and
no,
money
it's
people
a
running
particular
big
cast of mind, which is probably attracted to the law. But I talked to body workers, the guys who do everything from massage to Reiki, and you know what they say is the easiest people to treat are creative artists, because they're used to letting go and letting things happen. The hardest people to treat are businessmen, because they have to control everything, and so their body is in a constant state of stress and the muscles get like massaging concrete.
Now, towards the back of the book, you quote, I think it's Bill Goldman paraphrasing William Faulkner, kill your darlings. The idea that in the creative process, sometimes the first thing that sets us off, we get stuck on it, and sometimes that stops us moving forward.
Yes, because if you're doing something creative, it will be changing shape right up to the last moment. So you don't know whether was something at the start is still relevant.
And forever. So the process, I'm thinking in a rather cheeky way about the BBC perhaps tinkering with your creative processes. Let's say you write an episode of Fawlty Towers, it's enjoyed and adored for decades, but it's kill your darlings, someone's out there unpicking it to make sure it's better for more modern times.
Yes, but it's not meant quite like that. The kill your darlings is to someone who's in a creative state and who's been working on it for some time and has to see whether an idea that excited them at the start is still relevant to the end product. But the great problem is, I'm being entirely serious now, that I've been doing a study for some years, because when I wrote the book with Robin Skinner, I said to him, Robin, how many people in your profession really know what they're doing? And he said about 10%. And I was talking 3 months ago to the guy who looks after the LA Clippers, who is the best body worker I've ever come. And I asked him the same question. He said less than 10%. You have to realize that most people don't know what they're doing. And it's kind of funny, but I'm being quite serious. Most people don't really know what they're doing, but the trouble is they don't know that they don't know what they're doing. See, that's the thing, and that gives them confidence. So in order for something to work, the person in charge has got to know what they're doing. That's a very rare event. And the terrible thing is, it's true. I often say to people, I meet anybody who's really good at what they do, and you say how many people, 10 to 15%. And once somebody went as high as 20. Most people do not really understand what they're doing. They learn a sequence of things that they do in a particular order, and they know how to do that. But if that doesn't work, then they're like I am when the computer crashes. They have no idea what to do next.
It's very interesting you say that, and it's something that actually chimed with me, that almost let's play on familiarity breeds contempt, that if you spend a long time on a certain project, in my case I showed 18 years of it, in the end, it's difficult to keep the creative push. You do fall back onto the things. I know, I've done this. I've done elections before. I know how it works. And there's great danger in falling back on that.
The great danger is to think you know what you're doing. That's the moment you die. Do you see what I mean? And all the people I've come across who are really special will admit that they don't really know what they're doing. I mean, people ask me about comedy, do you know if something's funny? And I think I've got to the point now where I know probably whether people are going to laugh, but I don't know if they're going to laugh a little bit or a lot. And that's after, what, 50 years of doing it.
You're lucky to get the feedback, the instant feedback, because of course
oh, well, that
people
helps,
on radio
yeah.
are putting it out there,
Yeah.
and unless they got a phone-in show with people saying, by the way, I think you're this or that, you don't know.
No, well, that's why people who work in the aircraft industry, you know, in travel, air travel, are so good. Because Matthew Wright points that out, because if they fuck up, people are dead. And that's a very good feedback.
Okay. I don't think there's a better way to round off the general conversation. We've got some questions coming through from the audience here. And I like this one straight away from Sam. Do you think that long office hours, reduce sleep, harm creativity?
Yes. Next question.
You also say in the book that there's a tendency perhaps for some of us to act like we're working in a work environment, to appear to be doing lots of stuff.
Yes, that's right.
Because that's what our bosses expect of us.
That's right. I always said if Albert Einstein was famous at Princeton for sitting there with his feet on his desk, and you could see it from outside. You see, there was Einstein with his feet in his desk. But if any of you had a boss who came into your office and you had the feet on his desk, you know? So it's the person in charge sets the tone, and if they don't understand about the necessity for creativity or the circumstances in which you become creative, you're in trouble.
Well, the next question from Glyn is pretty much, and a couple of other people are echoing, is what can radio executives, what can producers do to foster a more creative environment?
Well, they've got to understand how creativity works. And then they've got to get a group together, and they've got to encourage the people who are more shy, who hold back, and keep under control the people who are trying to take the meeting over, so that you create a balanced feeling between people. You've got to, if you're not going to annoy the creatives, you've got to be open yourself. If you're trying to get the creatives to come to a solution that you've already made your mind up about, that's a disaster, because creatives spot that immediately. You see, creatives are different. Well, they want recognition more than they want money. And that's something for the bosses, very, very hard for the bosses to understand that.
When I was preparing this, I was thinking, and I didn't do it, and I wish I'd do it now. It's just out of interest. Can I have a show of hands? Who here, not necessarily in a creative role, but who here thinks of themselves as creative? And I just want to see if the hands change, if you keep them up. Are you in a creative role? If you're still in a creative role, keep your hands up. There's a few go down.
There are a few. There's a marvelous guy in America who works for what's it called? Hallmark Cards. And he goes into schools and he says, when he talks to 6-year-olds and says, are you creative? You know, talks to 10-year-olds, about 40% of them put their hands up. He talks to 16-year-olds, are you creative? And everybody's looking around to see who this oddity is. And it gets educated out of you by subtle ways. When I was 15, my teacher, English teacher, said, write an essay on time. And I knew how difficult that was. It's almost impossible to talk about time in words. So I wrote an essay about the fact that I hadn't had time to write the essay, which is quite amusing. And he said, Cleese, this isn't a proper essay. Now, that's how creativity gets started. Not by somebody saying, bad person, but by just saying, no, that's not the way we do it. Oh, in that case, I won't go down that avenue again.
I want one more, and if I'm just on our schooling system, because that's where it starts, isn't it? I mean, I see my daughter now, baby daughter, she's becoming creative in playing and stuff like that. Is our school system at fault here? Are we turning out too many people who aren't?
There's one or two things I don't understand. I have a connection with Bath University, and I said to them some time ago, would you like me to do a sort of in-house thing about creativity? We're very happy to do it to the students, and if staff want to come. And I haven't heard back from them. Yeah. You know, and what I find is that the educationalists are the people, for some reason, who are least interested in this stuff. People who are actually in business want innovation. They want to make things better, come up with better ideas. They're very open to this stuff. Why aren't the educators? Maybe it's because teachers aren't very creative and don't think it's important.
Very last one. Are there creative people then? Is that what we're actually saying? There are creative types and there are
Oh,
uncreative
no,
types?
if you understand how to create, if you're sad, you have sad thoughts. If you're angry, you have angry thoughts. If you want to have creative thoughts, you've got to be relaxed and playful. Playful is the key word. Play, play, play. And if you can learn to be playful, and then the stuff will start coming up. The only thing I would say is when it comes up from the unconscious, it doesn't come up in neatly typed out little sentences. It comes up much more as feelings. For example, Bernard Berenson, who was the greatest authority on Renaissance painting, do you know how he knew that he was looking at a fake?
Can't.
Yeah, he began to feel ill. So promptings from the unconscious are not so much in terms of words, they're in terms of an image or an idea, you know? And I was writing something recently, and I was in the Caribbean, and I did some swimming, and I came up the shallow end, and I stood up, and I thought, oh yeah, I have to do it in two ways. Do you see what I mean? And that's when it comes to you. You put the hard work thinking in, but the inspiration very frequently pops up when you're not expecting it. It's a little bit like the tip of the tongue thing, that if you try too hard to think of the name that you can't remember, it recedes into if you switch your attention somewhere else, 3 minutes later, your unconscious gives it to you. It's quite paradoxical.
Michael Palin.
John Cleese, ladies and gentlemen.
Fascinating.
Thank you.
Amazing, incredible stuff. That was so interesting. What a legend. Very exciting. So there you have it. John's short guide to creativity is available to buy now. Good Christmas present for mum and dad. What are we saying? I reckon so.